The Wyoming wind cut through the valley like a frozen blade that November morning in 1943. James William Bradford stood outside the recruitment office in Cheyenne, his worn boots sinking slightly into the half-frozen mud. At 24, he was lean and weathered, with hands calloused from years of ranch work and eyes that could track a coyote across 3 miles of open prairie. The war had been raging for years, and now it had finally come knocking on his door. Inside the cramped office, Sergeant Morrison barely looked up from his paperwork as James signed his name. The pen felt strange in his hand, too light compared to the rifle he'd carried since he was 12. His father had taught him to shoot on their cattle ranch in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains, where missing meant a dead calf and a hungry winter. James never missed. Boot camp at Fort Benning was a different kind of hell. The Georgia humidity wrapped around him like a wet blanket, nothing like the dry cold of home. While other recruits struggled with their M1 Garins, James made every shot count. His instructors noticed immediately. By the 3rd week, they'd pulled him aside. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was a thick-necked man with a purple scar running from his left ear to his collar. He'd lost half his platoon in North Africa and had no patience for pleasantries. He watched James put 5 rounds through the center of a target at 300 yards, then grunted. "You shoot like you've been doing it your whole life, Bradford." "Since I was tall enough to hold a rifle steady, sir. My father needed me to protect the herd." Hayes nodded slowly. "We're forming specialized units. Sharpshooters. Men who can think and shoot under pressure. You interested?" James didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." They shipped him to a classified training facility in Virginia, a place that didn't appear on any map. There were 32 men in his unit, pulled from ranches, hunting lodges, and backwoods all across America. They were taught advanced marksmanship, camouflage, patience, and something the instructors called fieldcraft. But James already knew most of it. He'd spent countless nights in Wyoming winters, lying motionless in the snow, waiting for wolves that threatened his family's livelihood. The real education came from Captain Edmund Harding, a British liaison officer with the build of a scarecrow and the eyes of a hawk. Harding had served in the First World War and carried himself with a quiet authority that demanded respect without ever raising his voice. He'd been sent to train American snipers in European combat tactics. During a field exercise in the Virginia hills, Harding pulled James aside after he'd made an impossible shot through a gap in the trees that no one else had even seen. "You have instinct, Bradford. Most men can be taught to shoot. Very few can be taught to see. You see the battlefield differently. My father used to say the land talks if you know how to listen, sir." Harding smiled, a rare expression that made him look almost human. "Your father was a wise man. In Europe, that skill will keep you alive. Or get you killed trying something brilliant." By February 1944, James was on a transport ship crossing the Atlantic. The water was black and endless, and he spent most of the voyage on deck, staring at horizons that never seemed to get closer. He thought about his mother's last letter, about his younger sister Mary who wanted to be a teacher, about the ranch that would need tending when he got back. If he got back. They landed in England on a morning so gray it seemed like the sky had fallen into the sea. The coastal town of Portsmouth was a maze of narrow streets and ancient buildings that leaned against each other like tired soldiers. James was assigned to the 2nd Ranger Battalion, a unit being prepared for something big. No one said what, but everyone knew. The training intensified. They practiced beach landings, cliff scaling, urban combat. James was paired with a spotter named Tommy Chen, a quick-witted kid from San Francisco who could calculate wind speed and distance faster than most men could tie their boots. They became an efficient team, Chen calling out adjustments, James making the shots. But it was during a demonstration for senior officers that everything changed. James had positioned himself in the loft of an old stable, using the angle and elevation to take out targets that others couldn't even range properly. The geometry was perfect, the sight lines clear. He dropped 12 targets in under 6 minutes, each shot precisely placed. Colonel Bradshaw, a by-the-book West Point graduate with more medals than patience, watched the entire display with increasing irritation. When James climbed down, Bradshaw was waiting. "That angle is unconventional, Bradford. Dangerous. You're exposing yourself unnecessarily." "With respect, sir, the elevation gives me coverage over. I don't care about your cowboy tactics. This is the United States Army, not a ranch in Wyoming. You'll follow standard positioning protocols. That loft angle is banned. Consider this your only warning." James stood at attention, jaw tight, saying nothing. But inside, something shifted. He'd just proven what he could do, and they were telling him to shoot like everyone else. Tommy caught his eye from across the yard and shook his head slowly, a silent message: "Don't fight this now." That night, lying in his bunk, James stared at the ceiling and wondered if the army would let him do what he did best when it mattered most. Or if they'd clip his wings before he ever got the chance to fly. The weeks that followed felt like walking through quicksand. Every training exercise became a test of obedience rather than skill. James was forced to use standard positions, standard angles, standard everything. His shooting remained flawless, but the creativity that made him exceptional was being suffocated by regulations and red tape. Tommy noticed the change immediately. During a rainy afternoon at the rifle range, he leaned close while they waited their turn. "You're shooting like a robot, man. What happened to the guy who could read the wind like a book?" James kept his eyes forward. "Just following orders." "Since when do you follow orders that make you worse at your job?" "Since a colonel told me my way could get men killed." But it was more than that. The other snipers had started looking at him differently. Some with relief that the golden boy had been knocked down a peg. Others with something closer to pity. Sergeant Kowalski, a veteran from the Italian campaign, pulled him aside after a particularly frustrating drill. "Listen, kid. I've seen 100 sharpshooters come and go. Most of them are dead now. You know why? Because they thought they were special. They took risks. The army doesn't want special. It wants reliable." James wanted to argue, to explain that calculated risks weren't the same as recklessness, that innovation had won battles since men first picked up rocks to fight. But Kowalski's eyes carried the weight of too many funerals, too many letters home to grieving mothers. So James just nodded and walked away. The breaking point came during a combined forces exercise in the Scottish Highlands. American and British units were training together for the invasion everyone knew was coming. The objective was to take a fortified position on a hillside, and James had been assigned to provide covering fire from a standard concealed position in the tree line. But from where they'd placed him, he couldn't see half the approach. There was a stone shepherd's cottage about 200 yards east, elevated, with perfect sight lines over the entire kill zone. James radioed in, requesting permission to relocate. "Negative, Bradford. Hold your position. That's an order." He watched through his scope as the assault team moved forward. Then he saw them, enemy observers in positions his current angle couldn't touch. They were calling in coordinates, preparing to rain hell on the advancing Americans. James could take them out from the cottage. He could save lives. But the order was clear. Hold position. The exercise ended badly. 12 men tagged as casualties, including Tommy, who took a simulated grenade blast because the enemy observers hadn't been neutralized. It wasn't real combat, but the lesson was. James had followed orders perfectly, and good men had paid the price for his obedience. That night, sitting alone in the mess hall, James realized that the army had taken everything that made him effective and locked it away. They'd turned a hunter into a trained monkey, and somewhere across the channel, real Germans were waiting who wouldn't care about regulations or proper procedure. They would only care about who could shoot faster and think smarter. And right now, James wasn't allowed to be either. June 5, 1944. The air was thick with tension and diesel fumes as thousands of men prepared for what everyone knew would be the largest amphibious assault in human history. James stood on the deck of the USS Samuel Chase, watching the dark waters of the English Channel roll beneath a moonless sky. In less than 12 hours, they would hit the beaches of Normandy. Captain Harding found him there, the British officer's face harder than usual in the dim light. "Bradford. Walk with me." They moved to a quieter section of the deck, away from the clusters of nervous soldiers writing last letters home. Harding pulled out a battered silver case and offered James a cigarette. He declined. "I've been reviewing the landing assignments. You're positioned in a standard beachhead support role. Textbook placement. Safe. Useless." James said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Harding continued, his voice dropping lower. "I've seen the reports from Scotland. I know what happened. I also know what you could have done if they'd let you think for yourself. Here's the truth, Bradford. Tomorrow, men are going to die. Hundreds, maybe thousands. And some of those deaths will happen because we're following doctrine written by men who've never seen real combat. Sir, I don't understand what you're... I'm giving you permission." Harding's eyes locked onto his. "When you hit that beach, if you see an angle that works, if you see a position that can save lives, you take it. I don't care what Bradshaw said. I don't care about regulations. You do what you were born to do." James felt something unlock in his chest, something that had been coiled tight for months. "But if I disobey direct orders? Then you'll be court-martialed by a grateful nation after you help us win this war." Harding's smile was grim. "Or you'll be dead and it won't matter. Either way, I need the real James Bradford tomorrow, not the neutered version the army created. Can you do that?" Before James could answer, Tommy appeared from the shadows, his face pale but determined. "I heard everything. And he's right, James. We both know he's right." James looked between them, then out at the dark water that separated them from a beach that would run red with blood in a few hours. Every instinct he'd ever trusted was screaming at him to trust it again now. "Yes, sir. I can do that." "Good." Harding clapped him once on the shoulder. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow we'll need every bit of that Wyoming magic you've been hiding. If you're feeling something right now, if you're rooting for James to finally unleash what he's capable of, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next on Omaha Beach will change everything, and you won't want to miss a single moment of it." The night stretched on, endless and suffocating. James didn't sleep. He cleaned his rifle, checked his ammunition, and prepared himself for the moment when all the rules would disappear and only survival would matter. Dawn was coming. And with it, the test of his life. The landing craft hit the water like a coffin being dropped into a grave. James gripped his rifle as the ramp splashed down and machine gun fire tore through the air like angry hornets. Men fell before they even reached the sand. The water turned pink, then red. Omaha Beach was a slaughterhouse. James hit the sand running, staying low, moving fast. Bodies littered the beach like broken dolls. Explosions threw geysers of sand and blood into the gray morning sky. He spotted Tommy 50 yards ahead, pinned behind a tank obstacle, enemy fire keeping him flat against the metal. The German bunkers were positioned perfectly, interlocking fields of fire that turned the beach into a kill zone. Standard doctrine said to advance, to push forward, to take the bunkers head-on. But James saw something else. To his left, perhaps 300 yards up the beach, there was a destroyed artillery position, elevated slightly on a natural ridge. From there, he could see into the bunkers. From there, he could end this. He didn't ask permission. He ran. Tommy saw him break away and understood immediately. He started laying down covering fire, drawing attention while James sprinted through hell. Bullets kicked up sand at his feet. A mortar round landed close enough to knock him sideways, but he kept moving. His lungs burned. His heart hammered against his ribs like it wanted to escape. He reached the ridge and dove behind the wrecked artillery piece. The metal was still hot from whatever had destroyed it. James steadied his breathing, found his center the way his father had taught him. The chaos around him faded to background noise. All that existed was the scope, the target, and the space between heartbeats. The first German never knew what hit him. James put a round through the machine gun nest's firing slit, dropping the gunner instantly. The second shot took out the man who tried to take his place. Through the scope, he could see into positions that had been invisible from the beach. The elevated angle gave him everything. His training took over, but it was more than training. It was instinct honed over 2 decades of hunting, of patience, of understanding how terrain and geometry created opportunities. He moved systematically through the bunkers, each shot deliberate, each target chosen to create maximum disruption. A German officer trying to coordinate his men. Down. A machine gunner repositioning to new coordinates. Down. A mortar team loading their weapon. Down, down, down. Tommy kept count later, though James never did. 9 minutes from the moment he took position until Captain Harding's voice crackled over the radio ordering a push forward. 15 confirmed kills. 15 Germans who would never fire another shot, never pin down another platoon, never send another American boy home in a box. The bunkers fell silent. The beach, still deadly, became survivable. Men who had been pinned down for 30 minutes suddenly found themselves able to advance. James didn't move from his position. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled, but inside he was shaking. The beach secured by mid-afternoon, though the cost had been staggering. James made his way through the carnage, stepping over equipment and bodies, his rifle still warm in his hands. Medics worked frantically on the wounded. Engineers cleared obstacles. The living moved forward while the dead remained behind, their war over. Tommy found him sitting on a concrete barrier, staring at nothing. His friend's uniform was torn and blood-stained, but he was alive. He sat down heavily beside James, neither speaking for a long moment. 15, Tommy finally said. I counted 15. In 9 minutes. James didn't respond. His mind kept replaying each shot, each face in the scope before it disappeared. They'd been trying to kill him, trying to kill everyone on that beach. He knew that. But knowing didn't make the weight any lighter. You saved my life, Tommy continued quietly. You saved a lot of lives today. That bunker I was pinned at, you took it out in your second minute up there. I saw the gunner fall through the slit. I just did what needed doing. No. Tommy's voice was firm. You did what only you could do. That angle, that position, the way you read the battlefield. Bradshaw was wrong. Harding was right. And every man who walked off this beach alive owes you. Captain Harding appeared before them, his uniform caked in sand and blood, his face showing the exhaustion of a man who'd seen too much death for one day. But his eyes were clear when he looked at James. Bradford. The colonel wants to see you. James's stomach tightened. Here it comes. The court-martial. The consequences of disobedience. He followed Harding through the chaos to a hastily established command post. Colonel Bradshaw stood over a map table, surrounded by junior officers. When James entered, the room went quiet. Bradshaw looked up, his expression unreadable. Bradford. You disobeyed direct orders today. Yes, sir. You abandoned your assigned position and took an unauthorized angle of attack. Yes, sir. Bradshaw stepped around the table, coming face to face with James. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the colonel extended his hand. You also probably saved 300 lives and turned the tide on this sector of the beach. I was wrong, son. Dead wrong. Your instincts in that moment were better than my doctrine. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. James shook his hand, too stunned to speak. Bradshaw's grip was firm, his eyes carrying something that might have been respect or might have been the exhaustion of a man learning hard lessons on a hard day. From now on, Bradford, you have latitude. You see an angle, you take it. You think something will work, you try it. We need men who can think and shoot, not just follow orders. Understood? Yes, sir. Understood. That night, James sat with Tommy and a dozen other survivors, sharing cold rations and warm relief. The war was far from over. There would be more battles, more beaches, more moments when everything hung in the balance. But James Bradford had found himself again. September 1945. The war was over. James Bradford stood on the front porch of his family's ranch in Wyoming, watching the sun set over the Bighorn Mountains. The colors were the same as they'd always been, gold bleeding into purple, the sky vast and endless. But he wasn't the same man who'd left 3 years earlier. His father sat in the rocking chair beside him, older now, grayer, but still strong. They'd spent the day repairing fence lines, familiar work that required no words. His mother was inside cooking dinner, and Mary, now 19 and accepted to teacher's college, was setting the table. "You've been quiet since you got back," his father said finally. "Just remembering." The nightmares had been bad at first. The faces in his scope, the sounds of the beach, the weight of knowing his bullets had ended lives even as they'd saved others. The army had offered him medals, promotions, a career if he wanted it. He declined all of it. He just wanted to come home. Captain Harding had visited him in the hospital in England after James took shrapnel in France. The British officer brought whiskey and news from the front. "They're teaching your methods now," he'd said. "The loft angle, the elevated positions, the way you read terrain. You changed how we think about snipers, Bradford. Every man we train from now on will learn from what you did on that beach." James had never wanted to be a teacher or a legend. He'd just wanted to survive and help others do the same. Tommy had made it through as well, returning to San Francisco to work in his family's restaurant. They exchanged letters monthly, each one shorter than the last, but the connection remained. You didn't forget the man who'd counted your shots while the world burned around you. His father stood up slowly, placing a weathered hand on James's shoulder. "Your mother worries. Says you're carrying something heavy. But I figure a man comes back from war, he's allowed to carry what he needs to carry. Just don't let it crush you, son." "I'm trying, Pa. That's all any of us can do." Dinner that evening was loud with Mary's stories about college and plans for the future. His mother kept piling food on his plate like she could heal the war years with pot roast and mashed potatoes. James listened more than he talked, grateful for the noise, for the normalcy, for the life that continued despite everything. Later, alone in his childhood bedroom, James opened his footlocker and pulled out the silver star they'd awarded him. He'd never shown it to his family, never mentioned it. The medal was heavy in his palm, cold metal that represented the worst and best 9 minutes of his life. He put it back in the box and closed the lid. Tomorrow he'd wake up and work the ranch. He'd mend fences and check the herd and live the quiet life he'd fought to preserve. The war had taught him what he was capable of, but peace was teaching him who he wanted to be. And for the first time since Omaha Beach, that felt like enough.